pilot of the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to introduce Richard Thomsen.
Well, thank you. I just want to say what a privilege this is for me. Excuse me if I get a little sentimental or whatever, but I have to go back to a time when I worked with Paul Pobrisny. If you recall, he's a fine gentleman and his wife that started the EAA. And when he came here to Wisconsin, and I was fortunate enough to have the time, and my family would let me come quite frequently and work in Paul's workshop. So I had the opportunity to build some parts and pieces for a lot of the aircraft that you see here today. As a result, I get a little sentimental because I never dreamt that someday I might talk to a fine group like this. So yes, it's a real treat for me. Well, here you see the B-29, and it's, can somebody tell me, why is it that the 29 has gotten such a big write-up all the time? You know, during World War II, there were so many good aircraft, and particularly bombers. Why? Because I was involved in that. But, you know, the B-17, B-24, he probably did as much and more, in fact, hours than the 29 did. So why is it that the 29 gets such publicity? Anybody want to try and answer that? Yes.
Because there's not very many flying around anymore.
Well, that's true. There's not many flying around. There's only one. There's a second one about ready to. He hoped to bring it here, a multimillionaire. But
computerized guns, pressurized cabin.
Yes, right.
Very good.
But there's another primary reason, yes.
They were not shut down because of the Tuskegee.
I'm sorry, I can't quite get it.
Atomic bomb. They were shot down because they had the Tuskegee Airmen protecting them.
Okay. So really, isn't it because there's only one airplane known that ever carried an A-bomb and killed thousands of people? Now that's sad, really. Isn't it sad to think that we as humans have to kill each other to that kind of degree? But yet, I give a lot of thanks to FDR, our president at the time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was the one that said, we have to have a long-range aircraft. We have to stop this war. And that was the key to getting the B-29 eventually designed and built. And dear Harry acquainted, and away we went. Why? Because it could fly 6,000 miles. Just think of it, almost across the United States, you could fly one of these suckers. Okay, I'm going to, if you'll permit me, just take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about myself. It's not that I want to brag or anything like that. I want you to understand what a lot of young teenagers, if they wanted to be a pilot in the Army, and I'm sure the same as in the Navy and the Marines, you had to have the discipline. And I'm not talking about that discipline of a teacher hitting you over the knuckles. I'm talking about discipline of self. You have to be willing to ask yourself, am I doing the right thing? Have the discipline that once you learn something, you practice it and you do it right. I was very, very fortunate that I was brought up in a family. There, by the way, is a picture of me standing next to it. And gives a little idea of the scope of the size. And I'm sure that some of you have seen that too. And I happen to have a retirement that allows me to give lectures, 3 different subjects. And I won't go into the 3, and naturally one of them is the B-29. But yes, here I am, as you see me as a kid. I'm the shortest one. I was a redhead, a little fiery kid, I guess. But at any rate, my brother was about 4 years older, and my father, as you can see, quite tall, like I am. And it may sound strange, but my father flew in World War I, and he flew Jennings. I think most of you know who that is. So, okay, I was born into a great family, middle class, but the Depression was there in the 1930s. I was born in 1924. Oops, now all of a sudden you know how old I am. I'm 91, and I'm proud of it, and I'm thankful, praise the Lord. So they were Depression years, and my father lost his job being in Omaha, Nebraska. That was really the work available. So where did we go? We moved to Chicago, and I was at the age of 6 by that time. And I attended a so-called private school. It was a high-end high school. And they were great teachers. And again, I want to emphasize this fact. The best thing that they did for me is establish that feeling of self-discipline. Of just, making yourself realize what you're doing all the time. And realizing what's right and what's wrong. And retaining what you know is right. And that was one of the main themes in all of my schooling. Well, as a result, being in that particular, in the 40s, then the draft taking place, I was a teenager, just graduated from high school, and I had to sign a card to stay for the draft. And on it, I said I wanted to be a minister. Of all things, it put me in an F rating. At that time, I guess they didn't need guys very fast. But at any rate, I had a rating of 4F. And one of this young teenager said nuts to that. So I went and enlisted in the Army Signal Corps. Why in the Signal Corps? Model railroading happened to be my hobby, and there's electricity to run it, so I thought I was a pretty good electrician. But anyway, I enlisted in the Signal Corps, and it wasn't a bad choice, I suppose. But World War II all of a sudden presented a requirement for all new plans. So in December of 1942, end of the year, off to basic training in Scottsfield, Illinois, at the age of 18. I happened to be the youngest in the group. I went through 5 months of training then at that particular time, and we were off to Atlantic City ready to get on the boat to go to Germany. And that was in April of 43. And actually we did more training. What kind of training? Digging foxholes in the sand for practice. So, in 3 days off, I could take a test, they said, and I wouldn't have to dig foxholes. So we wouldn't do that. Instead of shipping out, an officer came up called my name off and said, "Pop 2, young fella, you're now in the Army Air Corps." I said, "What? What?" He said, "Yes, you heard me. Yes, sir." So, where did they send me? To college training department. And that was in Pennsylvania, Williamsport. The government had taken over a college in the city, the campus, everything they took over. And there were thousands of us being trained. And we went first through map reading, why aircraft fly. I didn't know why they flew. Maybe rubber bands, I don't know. Anyway, aircraft identification, primarily German aircraft. Along with it, the training of instruments. Every instrument that's on an airplane, we took them apart, put them back together, never worked together. But at least you knew how they were made. So we spent these months training all of these particular factors. A lot of time was spent on weather. And I add again, discipline. Your teacher said, "We're not teaching you just for fun. We want you to know and to realize the importance of everything that you do." So that's self-discipline required. And let's not forget physical education. I'll never forget it because I've never done so many chin-ups, push-ups. It's just endless, hour upon hour. And as a result, 7 months in mind and body training. And by the time we had finished these 7 months, I would say close to 20% of the cadets, actually we weren't called cadets yet, because we hadn't passed. However, for the students, close to 20% could no longer stay. Why? Mainly discipline. They either snuck out the window or got drunk at night, or they had foul language. You name it, out you went. We call that washout. So I hope you begin to see that to become a pilot, I don't care what kind of plane, in the Army, and I give the Army so much credit, and I know the Navy was the same way, or the Marines. Discipline, 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 and stuff. And fortunately, my parents had taught me that, and I knew the value of it, and I've known it ever since. So what happened was, instead of digging ditches, I go in and become part of the Army Air Corps. And where did they send me? To a difficult place like Florida. And look at the accommodations that we had. Avon Park, Florida, a few miles to the south of the city, if you've ever been there. And it's on a couple of beautiful lakes. If you look at it close, then you'll see a big picture of it later. You see, there's a lot of swimming involved too. But before we left, we had to swim across the lake. Wow, great accommodations. Instead of a barracks full of 14 people, there was 2 to a room. Wow. What more classroom study? You bet. They say soon you will see an airplane. Well, we kind of was getting to a point after over almost a year. I hadn't seen a plane at all. So by now, there were several washouts of this image, almost 20%. Then we met our teachers. And who were the teachers? They were our instructors to teach us how to fly. I found out, and I guess this was true, in fact I know this was true, all through the Army Corps, at least, Air Force, these teachers were not officers, they were civilians. And why? And we were told why. We don't want you to feel that you're being told to do things by a higher command and force you. We want you to know they are like you are, and they're there to help you and want to talk to you and not have to salute them every time you see them. Another phase set up by the government that my teachers were not going to be superior. They were going to be like me, but they knew how to fly, and they were going to teach me how to fly. So, we started out with PT-13, not an easy bird to fly. I want to ask, and I'll get to that, by the way, there's a better picture of that difficult launching that we had. I'm sorry, this is a P-17 Stearman, 220 horsepower. How many people here have flown a PT-17? 2, 3. Would you call it easy or squirrely?
Easy. Squirrely.
How about on the ground?
Squirrely.
Okay, squirrely, and that's exactly what it was. The first airplane ever learned to fly is going to be a Stearman. Take a look at the plane real carefully. How high off the ground is it? The landing gear is pretty long. Center of gravity is up high. If it starts to turn, the first thing it wants to do is have a wingtip down on the ground. Also, look at the distance between the wheels. It's very narrow. If you ever had a bicycle, a tricycle, and if the back wheels are close together, you can tip over real easy. Same thing is true here. So that was a very, in my opinion, a very difficult plane to fly. Okay, 220 horsepower. So for several weeks, we started, as I mentioned, in classrooms. Average of 1 in 10 would wash out, and actually was closer to 2. We were issued equipment. Wonder what that could be. That was the parachute that I was going to wear for the rest of the year. No matter where I trained, that was mine to keep. The two-place aircraft, student sat in the back and instructor in front, in my particular case. And the hours flying with instruction, less than 9.5 hours. Today I look at that and I say, my God, an 18-year just turned 19. In the squirreliest airplane you can fly, and in less than 9.5 an hour, what's he going to do? He's going to get out and tell me go solo. So hours of solo in an airplane was 65. The total of this thing roughly 74 hours. But I'll tell you, those who ground looped a lot, they were gone. Now you should understand a little bit why there's such a high washout in primary. So total landings 180. Again, to get experience on the ground. You know, that airplane can do anything in the air. I don't care what. If it's slow rolls, snap rolls, vertical aids, Sean does. It's a beautiful airplane to fly in the air. But put it on the ground, it stinks. There's another view of it. On to larger aircraft. So here I was, it's roughly 75 hours of flying. And when did they put me in the BC-13? In the Bridgeburg, Bainbridge, Georgia. It's an all-metal, very large radial engine, twice the horsepower of that little Stearman. Now 450 horsepower. And full instruments for night flying. My first experience of night flying was just unbelievable. To me, the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. To fly particularly on the moonlight night. And also to fly over a city. You and see all the glimmering lights. To a teenager, that was fantastic. Why did we have that instrument flying? If you dare, how many of you like night flying? It's really a thrill, isn't it? But taking off out in the country, there's no lights around you. You take off. The minute you get up in the air, what do you see? Black. If you don't know how to fly instruments, you're in trouble. So we learned in a hurry discipline. When they teach you how to fly at night and by instruments, take it to heart. Daytime, we also did formation flying. And the BT-13, again, I love formation flying. Why? Discipline. And who's your leader? Played up in front. And you better do the same thing he's doing, or you're in trouble. So we do a lot of formation flying as well. BT-13, well, to me, it's a fine airplane. Look at the landing gear. What's the difference between this and the BT-17? They're wide apart, very stable on the ground. I don't care what you kick the rudders. You can handle that sucker, whether you're landing at 70 or 100. It's no problem. Very stable center of gravity, again, low. So, you learn a lesson. They teach you the hard thing first, wash it out if you can't do it. Because now, from now on, you're not going to have trouble on land with any of it. Again, a two-seated aircraft, platform at the beginning of our days, start instrument orientation and flying. Why did you do it at nighttime? The formation and instruction that I fell in love with. A total of 76 hours of flying, 20 of which were in the hands of the instructor, and 56 solo. That included night flying, formation flying, and instrument flying. So now we're starting to build up our hours of flying, beginning into the hundreds of hours. And at that time I did 146 landings both night and day. Again, we had, I'd say, about a 1% washout in my class. Little by little, you're beginning to see those who had good physical makeup and those who really had discipline and self and take seriously what we were doing in learning to fly. But I'll repeat, I loved this love formation flying. From there, I knew I had to go into bombers. Why? I was too tall. I tried to get an FB-38, and it didn't work. And as you saw in the picture, my dad was very tall. He was about 6'6". So I knew I had a little room to grow. So in September of 1944, we were in Seymour, Indiana, not too far from here. My daughter and son-in-law were thankful enough to drive me to Florida one time. We tried to go see an Avon Park, but it turned into a prison for officers. And then we wound up at Seymour, where I had a chance to look at the AT-10. Hundreds of twin-engine aircraft was all we saw. It was also interesting, about several months ago, I read an article in a book on how these particular aircraft were made out of plywood during the war. You ran out of aluminum making all the things necessary for bombers. But back to the subject of learning to fly the Beechcraft, now 600 horsepower, formation flying even at night. I just love that formation flying. It was, to me, a real challenge, and I loved doing it. So then came graduation time. The time to really be proud. The time that I received my wings and also received my commission to be in office. It so happened that the CO called me up and I thought, oh, what did I do wrong now? And he said, oh, relax. Yes, sir. And he said, how would you like to be a teacher? Teacher where? Teaching formation flying to cadets. I said, yes, sir. So I wound up for a couple of months teaching cadets the art of formation flying. February 1945, was sent then to Tennessee, and a B-24 Liberator, 4-engine power, 4,400 horsepower. The latest of aircraft to be used in the German war. And please, don't misunderstand. I think it's a great, great airplane. So is the B-17. And so is, there were so many fine bombing aircraft. I happened to be in line to go for B-24. And I think it's a wonderful airplane. It was easy to fly. And I tell you, after formation for an hour, you were pooped. Controls were a little stiff and difficult. But I loved the aircraft. So after training approximately 4 months, we assigned a crew of 11 and soon to be sent to Italy. But the 4,400 horsepower, February through June, was my training in the B-24. Would we be sent to Japan in 24s? As you saw and know, on May of 1945, the war ended in Germany. So I was no longer required to go to Italy. And why Italy? Because the 24 could fly further and easier out of that area than out of England. But no need to do that. And they did send some of the 24s into the South Pacific. And if you've read of some of the experiences of those pilots, it's not a good story. If they're in the water, they don't float very well. And they fall apart pretty fast. To me, I love to plane, but I do not like to love it over water. So, where did they send me? Montgomery, Alabama, to the B-29 Superfortress of 8,800 horsepower. I can't say enough about the B-29. I loved every bit of it. I was assigned my crew after quite a few hours of flying and training for the South Pacific. To me, it's a beautiful aircraft to fly. You can, first of all, it has servotams. So you weren't manually making those controls on the air or on the rubber. You had that extra power added to it with servos. And I could almost fly with my fingers. And to me, it was a very, very stable aircraft. Easy to handle on the ground as well. So I'm at a point now that I think you all realize that when we got to the end and I got my commission, it was close to 50% that washed out. And I give a lot of credit to the government and to the different corps, whether it's the Army, Navy, Marines. They can see the necessity of a person filing such an aircraft as a B-29. You better have self-discipline. You better have taken seriously what you were taught and how to do it. So I was being trained for the South Pacific. Have any of you had a chance? Those, I know there's some who flew at 29. 1, 2, 3, 4. Congratulations. Here's an instrument panel. If you haven't had the chance to take a walk through Fifi, and look, it's not a complicated instrument panel. It's just all the normal instruments. And on the left of you is the throttles. And one of the nice things about it, too, is you had somebody to do the work for you. You had a flight engineer. You look at his panel. He's got a lot more to look at. And he also has the throttles. The only thing he doesn't have control of the rudders or the aileron. So he can determine whether you're going to run out of gas or not, too. And their main responsibility, particularly in the South Pacific, get every value out of every drop of gasoline to make sure that you're coming back home and you're not going to be landing in water. So the flight engineer had a terrific responsibility to best utilize your fuel to make your engine run properly. I'll give you an example of the little things that was done at that time. Okay, you're at the end of a runway, you're going to take off. So I turned to my I talked to my flight engineer, and I say, ready for takeoff? He sets the throttles, he sets the prop RPMs, he does everything. I'm lucky just to steer. So he takes on that responsibility. And I had one real close call. And that was, we went through this routine, got to the center of the runway, and I knew we were going to take off. We had a full bomb load, and I talked to the flight engineer, and I said, did you put the flaps down? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, take a look out the window. No, sir. He had forgotten. He didn't forget. He switched the switch. You should have seen 3 men all of a sudden hit the emergency red button. Boom. And we just missed the end of the runway by about 10 feet. What had happened, there's a malfunction in the control. All the registers showed the flaps were down for takeoff, but they never were. So that's the only close call we ever had. And I'm thankful for that, and I'm thankful for the flight engineer that hit that red button before I did. But it's, to me, an excellent airplane. And here's your bombardier. He sits between the pilot and the co-pilot, and on his right, of course, is his bomb sights. And you're on a bomb run. He's actually flying your airplane through these controls. So what an experience for a teenager. Basically, in approximately 1 year, from never having been in an aircraft, and I'll never forget my dad first said, are you sure you're going to like it and not get sick? I was in command of the largest aircraft known, over 500 hours. So here was the sequence. PT-17, squirrely as all get up. PT-13, very stable on the ground. Couldn't do quite as much in the air as the 17. On to twin engine advance, then B-24s, and I wind up in the B-29. And how fortunate it can be. On the last flight that I ever had with my crew, on the way to the coast, announced on our intercom Enola Gay had just dropped the first A-bomb on Japan. Report back to your base. So in a matter of 5 hours, I landed for the last time in the B-29. World War II ends, Lieutenant Thomsen, 084-0002, honorable discharge, November 22nd, 1945. 70 years ago, and I'm still alive. Thank you so much. And I'm not trying to sell you something, but